Hello and welcome back to the Conversation Cabinet. Today we're very fortunate to be joined by author, amongst many other things, James Wise. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Yeah, it feels very weird to be introduced as an author. It's
No.
certainly not my day job, but I have written.
Yeah,
a
I
book
mean, we're
on it,
only
so I
looking
guess
at
that
one of
still
your
counts.
things in focus.
Could you give us a little summary of both, as Josh said, and as an author, but kind of what other things you've done and who you are for someone who may not know just yet?
Yeah, of course. So look, I'm James Wise. My day job is a venture capitalist, and so I'm one of the partners at Balderson Capital, with the largest European-focused venture fund. And what that means is we go out, and in particular, I spend a lot of my time meeting teams that are building new companies in the technology space. So it could be fintechs like Revolut and Clio. It could be self-driving vehicle companies like Wave. It could be e-commerce marketplaces like Depop or Zoe or List or Net-a-Porter. And we meet them very early on. Often it's just a couple of people and an idea and getting their product going. And we provide money to them, and then we help them over a decade or so build that business. And hopefully one day, it goes on to be a great success. And often, no, it doesn't also. And we help them get through those failures. And so that's what I do as a day job. But as a part of that, I meet lots and lots of entrepreneurs, right? That is my job. And as a result of that, I do other things as well. I work a bit with government on policy. I'm an author, and I've had a
All
few of
sounds
my
like
own
light
smaller
work
companies
then,
as well.
very, very easygoing. No, certainly.
Interesting work.
There's some big names there. Can you just give us an example of how you shaped, the government? That's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I sort of have a government role now. So I've always been interested in policy as well as technology. This is two areas that I just, personally find interesting. I think the two biggest things that affect your life outside of like your friends and your family over the last decade at least has been, what's happening with the government, what laws and what economic changes are happening, what's happening with technology. So there's the two things I just find interesting. On the policy side, I've been involved in lots of different policy initiatives over the years. But under the previous government, I was appointed as a member of something called the Industrial Development Advisory Board, which is a very long title for a board which basically looks at all the times government takes taxpayers' money and puts it into big industrial projects. So sometimes government will give taxpayers money to keep a car plant going, right? Nissan or BMW have had support over the years to keep their car plants going, or keep a steel plant open, or even most recently we've announced some taxpayer money going into helping to open a new theme park in the UK, right? The first ever Universal Studios in the UK. So those kind of decisions need scrutiny, where someone has to make sure the government isn't just wasting your money, that they're investing it studiously. I was appointed under the previous government and kept on its sort of apolitical role under the current government to provide some steering and feedback on those kind of investments.
I'm intrigued. Have you got any recent success with the current government? Have you felt like there's been any changes since the Conservative government's kind of disappeared? Is there a bit more difficulty in trying to find the money for the investment than also the people you're working with? What's that like for you?
Yeah, there's been a huge amount of change, right? There's a lot of change in the priorities of the Labour government versus the previous Conservative government. And there's a lot of change in the economic situation, which has got a lot worse in the last year, in particular since the last budget. So the priorities have shifted. There's a lot more focus now on things like big green energy projects, perhaps than there was previously, although there was some. I'm appointed in a apolitical way, right? So I'm appointed as an expert. You have to, in that regard, I'm just there to try and provide the best advice to save taxpayers' money. That's my job, is to say, please don't waste your money on this. But the priorities have shifted massively. And obviously, government's overall approach to business has changed, because they've said businesses and individuals have, like wealthy individuals, successful individuals, anyone building a company, basically, or trying to build a company, they have to shoulder more of the burden, as they say, right? The broader shoulders have to shoulder the burden. And so whether it's tax rises or it's increased regulation, there's been a lot of new pressures put on people building businesses or scaling infrastructure.
So talking about regulation, I believe there's something to talk about in your book that we'll get onto in a moment. Do you think there's too much red tape at the moment for businesses to truly thrive, especially for small businesses, which we should really put a big emphasis on?
Well, look, there's plenty of good regulation in the world, right? We want to make sure our food is safe to eat. We want to make sure the drugs we take for healthcare work. We want to make sure people are treated and respected in the workplace. So I don't want to get carried away, as some people do, and say like, burn all the regulations, right? We're a civilized society. But what is definitely true currently, more so than perhaps under the previous government, but even so, sometimes under the previous government, there was a lot more focus on how do we use the law to change things rather than how do we let the market change things. So, if you look at almost every area of building a small business, whether that's hiring people, whether that's filing for an innovation, like if you're developing a new medical device to help people monitor their diabetes, say, what the MHRA, that the medical regulator there can do, or perhaps you're building something innovative in financial services and you want to launch a new app there, what the financial regulators are likely to do. Right now, under the current Labour government at least, there's a lot more focus on regulating those companies. And obviously AI, which is the most interesting and perhaps most impactful emerging area of technology, there's a lot of regulation going on. Some of it completely right, but not all of it. So look, I think there's certainly examples where overregulation kills industries, especially when they're really early and everyone's experimenting and trying to see what works. Not giving people the chance to even try, I think, is a really big danger that the government can face to entrepreneurship, which benefits all of society. And there's a few risks of that at the moment.
A little bit on the AI and young people, and the majority of people these days has ChatGPT and AI on their fingertips, essentially. Everyone's using it. Everyone's using it for some form of either work or enjoyment. Do you think for young people specifically who are wanting to start a business or have the idea of having some form of entrepreneurship in mind, do you think AI is the right thing to use for that? As in, if it obviously, like you said, is regulation, so it also could in theory have negative impacts on people's creativity and stuff like that. But do you think AI is the right product to be using to create
Well, so the form of AI you're talking about, so generative AI in the form of generating text or images or video or code, which is where it's most popularly used right now, is an incredibly powerful tool. And, we invest in technology companies which are building AI, using AI. And I would say in my 15 years of investing in the technology industry, this is the most transformative technology I've ever seen. And it will be far more impactful on our lives than mobile was, than cloud has been, social media, everything. So you have to embrace it. And then the right question you ask, Ethan, is how does someone, in particular a young person, make sure that it's enabling them to do new stuff and not actually replacing them? Not replacing them as in a job. I mean, do we get lazy because we don't think through like the right question, or we don't think through the right product because we just trust whatever this powerful new form of generative AI offers us? Overall, I think it's really, really positive. And the reason why I argue that is because it explodes creativity. So if beforehand, let's say you had the idea for a product you wanted to build, right? It was like you wanted to sell a new cool kind of like, I don't know, Labubu inspired t-shirt or something like that, whatever the trend is this week. And you thought, loads of my friends would like that. AI now allows you to quickly generate hundreds of different designs and gives you loads of ways you could take it to market and gives you loads of ideas of ways you can market something. And that sort of just gives you this superpower of, rather than it taking me, I don't know, say a couple of hours to get to one design, I can get hundreds of designs in a couple of minutes. And so that's amazingly powerful. It's sort of an amplifier of your creativity. But with that, you need to have critical thought. And the difference between what you can achieve now, focused on one thing, and what Josh can achieve, what the rest of us can achieve, has shrunk. Because we can all go and generate hundreds and hundreds of creative ideas for t-shirts for our friends. And so instead, actually, the ability of being sort of, first of all, just really thinking deeply about what you think is interesting here. It can't just be like the first thing that comes out of ChatGPT, because now everyone has ChatGPT. Everyone has this creative potential. It can't just be, the first thing that comes up. You really have to think and push yourself to work out, is this valuable? So that's important. And I think also just the mission to doing something matters a lot more, because no longer can you just say, well, I've got this thing finished, I'm going to put it on the market, because in 2 seconds now, someone can copy it. So now you have to be completely committed to improving all the time, because the barriers to entry to replicate what you're doing have collapsed. It used to be like back in 2000, it used to be prohibitively expensive for someone to build and maintain their own website. Like if they wanted a web store, it used to be tens of thousands of pounds, possibly hundreds of thousands of pounds to set up one up. So you or I, me as a teenager, or you today, probably couldn't do that. Now you can set up or a year or two ago, you could set up a website in maybe 10 minutes, a decent one, like Shopify or Depop or one of these platforms. But now you can do it in 10 seconds, and you can just ask it to do extra stuff like add this widget, do this new thing as well. And so given all of that, the second anything that works, it could be copied. And so you need to make sure that you follow through. And I think the important thing with AI now is we have the character of being really thoughtful about what you want to do, because you have the creative power. You just need to have the ideas, really thoughtful about the ideas. And then secondly, really committed to delivering over time, because, anyone can do the first podcast or whatever now, all the technology's there. The question is, you're going to do it repeatedly, you're going to do it excellently, and you're going to do it consistently so that people come to trust and love what you're
really
producing.
interesting. And it's interesting to talk about the barriers to entry. It almost sounds like it's going to stimulate more competitiveness. Do you think that means that we can expect lower prices, or is it more AI can be utilized by the big oligopolies and monopolies in the world that can control the prices? What can we expect to see as recipients of prices?
Yeah, so at the moment you can expect lower prices, and we're seeing that, right? If you wanted to get a review of a document, you can get ChatGPT to do it for £20 a month, and they have a free tier, right? And let's say you wanted the first response from an expert on a document, maybe even a lawyer, right? You can now get someone to do it for £20 a month, in 10 seconds. It used to cost hours worth of some expensive expert's time. Now, it may not quite be as good as a full professional, but that's already brought down the cost. Same as I said about if you wanted to create some artwork, or if you wanted the first draft of an essay, or you wanted your work spell checking or reordering, or you wanted it translating, right? All of those things used to cost money to go and do an expert. Now, ChatGPT is replacing some of that work at a much lower price. And so it's allowing people, it's not just bringing down the price, it's also allowing people who beforehand could never have afforded to, let's say, translate text or translate a magazine article into their language. It's now letting them do it. So it's not just bringing the price down, it's fundamentally enabling more people to do something they couldn't do before. So in that regard, it's incredibly powerful. And so far, the way this technology is being rolled out, it looks like it's going to be competitive enough to keep prices low. Yeah, no, I was just saying, so far, it feels like, it is bringing down the price of certain services. And that will continue, right? Especially as this current stuff we're seeing, which is mostly generative AI, so text and video and code, especially as it goes into other areas. So whether it goes into more what we call agentic AI, so an AI which takes actions for you. So it goes and literally creates software for you and then fills out that software or does a task for you online. And ultimately, what we call embodied AI. So self-driving vehicles, robotics, automation, as those things become safer and better, they will offer people a perhaps cheaper alternative to other things out there.
A few of those things you mentioned, though, are typically kind of the things that people mention when they're skeptical or even scared of artificial intelligence, and the worry that what once was someone's, hours of labor and time creating or studying now almost becomes non-existent from their perspective, as in it almost feels worthless. What would you say to an AI skeptic or someone who is scared of that possibility of where their work becomes redundant or even, completely taken over by AI?
Yeah, and it's completely, I think, the history of technology has been this rightful battle between making sure we're building it in a way which is responsible and results in lower prices, better products, right? More competitive options for people, and displacing, other types of work. So far, historically, at least, mostly it's been helping people do small tasks better rather than replacing their whole jobs, right? Automation is not a new thing. So look at the modern farm, right? The modern farm has so much technology in it, right? Most tractors have some form of self-driving. They have some form of automated driving solution. The average farmer can actually be a lot more productive because there's so much better machinery and more intelligent processes now that, bigger and bigger farms can be monitored and looked after by fewer and fewer people. They can be far more productive. Same in a lot of supply chain and factories, right? You go into a modern warehouse, there's people in there and some of them doing really, important jobs, but there are fewer and fewer people. So, whether it's just the automation line, right? Model T backwards from Ford, or more recently, it's robotic systems which can move packages around so that humans can know which is the right next thing to pack and the next product to check. All of this automation has been going on through society over the years consistently. And now it's moving into areas which we think of as knowledge work, But the computers we're on replaced typists' job, and the typists do different jobs. Over the last 20 years, my job has always changed because the amount of stuff that you can do, whether it's with spreadsheets or email, then it comes new productivity tools, like coding tools, like new hosting tools, like it constantly changes what an individual is capable of. Overall, this process of change is always happening. More concerns now because it feels partly true, rightly, that the speed of change is increasing. But we have lived through some phenomenal changes over the last 20 years, technically, and we will live through the next 20. I think the big one I think that's coming, which perhaps will get a lot more public awareness than before, is embodied AI. So as you say, like, robotic entities, vehicles, drones, whatever they are. And I think that is an area we have to really get right and navigate, because you want other options out there. Like, we have buses, we have trams, we have black cabs, we've got Uber, your own car, you've got bicycles. People have lots of options to travel today. We should give them another option, which is automated vehicles. But how it fits, what's the right price point? How do you regulate it? What kind of licensing does it need? Which roads can it use? These are questions we still have to navigate and do it in a fair way. I personally think it'll just be like, in San Francisco, I use autonomous vehicles occasionally, and I use their equivalent to black cabs still, like yellow cabs. But it's just different times of day, different use cases, at different price points sometimes, the amount of speed you need to get there, because self-driving vehicles are quite slow. So these trade-offs will have to happen, and we're going to have to navigate them. Hopefully, when they land in the UK in 2026, people don't just shut it down. Britain's actually quite a pro-technology country, for all we whinge and whine sometimes. We do adopt mobile quickly. We've all got neobanks. We're very, big trusters of e-commerce generally. So we put ourselves down a bit. Actually, we are quite tech forward, but it's going to be a big issue. And it'll be a big political issue, because there will be some people, I think, who will say, no, this is awful. We don't need robots. We've got people to do these jobs. There will be some people who worry about the safety of it. There will be some people who, are vested interests who, want to make sure we can have self-driving cars, but they have to be my self-driving cars. Big corporates trying to do that. And we'll have to navigate these different voices, because there is a good outcome here, which can make transport cheaper for everyone, or a type of transport cheaper for everyone. But it's not something that's going to be easy to get through.
A really cautious but exciting time that we're living in, and that we're really about to live something quite exciting. And just going back to your example of the farmer and the productive efficiency, when we see that on a large scale, I'm sure we'll reap the benefits of lower costs and more affordability for homes. But on a more negative note, I personally, and Ethan, I'm sure you've also read about, there's this talk of an AI tech bubble, and I'm just curious to see your perspective as someone who works very closely with these companies, what you make of it. Is it real? What is it? Are there dangers that we're about to be facing?
Yeah, so whenever there's a major technological shift, there's almost always a financial bubble. There's academic studies of this going back to the canals in Manchester. You can go all the way back to tulips if you want. And there's a big difference between the canals in Manchester and the railroads and the Industrial Revolution and the internet bubble, .com bubble of 2000, and now the AI bubble and tulips. And the difference is one is a technological driven bubble, and the other one was purely financial. So I don't think the tulip innovation, the Dutch may disagree with me at the time, but I don't think the tulip bubble was because of some great breakthrough in technology, right? So it's basically a frenzy, a market created frenzy because of marketing and new financial instruments and everything else. What we're living through now is a brand new technology, which is being rolled out through society and will have huge impact. I hope mostly for the better on all of our lives. With that, though, comes financial speculation. And some of it you need, because we don't know yet what's going to work, right? There's now millions of entrepreneurs who are working on okay, how do I apply this to different parts of the economy? How do I make sure people get cheaper goods, cheaper food, cheaper healthcare, cheaper advice in the law, or cheaper financial advice? They're all trying these things, which is great. And investors are so excited. They're flooding money into the space, and especially the big technology stocks, right? So Nvidia, Google, Meta, and others, because there's all this enthusiasm around the technology. And I have no doubt that we're not in a technology bubble. It's not like tulips, right? I think this is a long-standing change we're going to go through, but there is over-financialization. And so at some point in the next 2 years, I'm sure there will be quite a significant market correction. I don't think it's next week, but it's probably not as long as 2 years away. And I don't know when it's going to be, sadly.
Yeah, of course.
The weird thing about bubbles is no one knows. But that doesn't mean that the technology is invalid. It just means, unfortunately, human nature sometimes gets overexcited, and then there'll be some kind of bubble and everyone will say, oh, it doesn't work. And then they'll be underexcited. And in reality, the technology continues to progress either way. Humans are well, we'll make it all a lot more fun.
I'd quite like to bring this conversation towards your book a little bit, your James Wise Startup Century. I'm really curious to know firstly, what would you, obviously because it's about startups, what would you say to yourself as a younger person wanting to create a startup? Where would you begin, especially also in today's world compared to when you were younger? The market would be completely different. But also, why did you make this book? What was your thoughts of creating this book? Like, what was your train of thought almost?
Yeah, so I'll handle the second question first. So my job involves me meeting hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of entrepreneurs a year, mostly across Europe, and then a few times a year investing in those people and helping them build companies globally. So I'm immersed. I set myself surrounded by people starting businesses, or who started a business recently and they're just getting to scale up. And so that's a really privileged position to be in, because I get to listen to all these people's stories. And I wanted to reflect what I saw as this big changing way that we're working. And so that was the idea behind it. And what I noticed in all the data I saw is that more and more people wanted to start businesses, which was in particularly a big shift in the UK. In the US, you could argue, has always been slightly more entrepreneurial for reasons we can go into. But the UK and other parts of Europe historically, or at least recently, haven't had that entrepreneurial zeal. Part of it because government has quashed it, partly because culturally we've pushed back on it, loads of reasons. But that was changing. And if you look at the types of jobs that young people wanted to do, they were far more entrepreneurial than historically. And even the parents of those young people, there's something called the Entrepreneurs Network, which does great work here in the UK, TEN, and they publish lots of surveys on this stuff. And even parents were getting more comfortable with the idea that their kids should go and start a business. They don't want them to be the top doctor anymore necessarily, or the top lawyer anymore necessarily, although they're still important roles. Now they're saying, I want them to be the founder of a great business. So that shift was happening. However, what I felt strongly was that institutionally, like as a country, we weren't supporting people in this shift. So for lots of reasons, people wanted to start businesses, but whether it's the education system, the financial system, our cultural institutions, everything else, we're not supporting people to be more entrepreneurial, because we still have all the systems in place that we had 50 years ago, which really were built around this idea that most people would have a single stable job for life, right? You would become a salesperson selling industrials, and that's what you would do. And, hopefully your wages will go up a bit over time. You get better at your job, you become a manager. But that was kind of your career trajectory. And all of that's out the window. And so both people want to be more entrepreneurial, which is great. But also, what I'm starting to see in the data is that people have to be more entrepreneurial, because those jobs, those lifelong careers are going, right? You can see it happening because the bigger companies they're doing more automation. They're trying to be more productive. And so the most successful companies in the world are basically getting smaller in terms of headcount per pound or per dollar that they create. They're actually shrinking proportionally. And now with AI and automation, you as an individual or a small team, this is what I do with startups, can be far more productive. This idea that we're going to have loads of like 1,000-person companies, which has been the bedrock of a lot of economic growth historically, that's under threat. That's changing quickly. 10 people may be able to do what 1,000 people can do with the right software and AI and ingenuity now. So if that's the case, we really need to support people to be entrepreneurs, because it's going to be one of the few career options left. But actually, there was some good stuff done under the previous government. There's one or two things occasionally mentioned by the current government, but actually it's very far down the political agenda. But it shouldn't be, because it's such a priority. And also I do feel there's a generation of people, old and young, who do want to be more entrepreneurial. And so that was the reason for writing the book. And the book tries to challenge some of the assumptions about how the state is structured, and say we need to change some of these things to give these entrepreneurial people a chance.
Just a few of those changes that need to be done, because it's a massive risk for anybody to start a business. You're sacrificing a safe job, as you mentioned, a job for life, is how it always used to be. You go get a job at the bank. That's pretty safe, isn't it? Well, we didn't see that in 2008. But yeah, so what needs to change? What needs to change for people to be able to feel like, yes, I can go do this?
Yeah. So I've listed a lot of different ideas in the book. So, if you look at the big shifts that people go through in their lives, so early education, right? When you're 16 or 18 in the UK, you're given a financial choice. You can go to university and we will give you 40 to 50,000 pounds in a recourse-free loan. Only 50% of people ever pay back. And the interest rates are high, but you don't pay it until you start earning money. We'll give you that option. Or you're on your own. Go get a job. Good luck. Right? You try and get a bank account for your business as an 18-year-old, no chance.
No.
Get a bank account as a student. If you go back to education, you have this opportunity when you're 18 where they say, look, you can go to university and we'll give you this incredible loan, 40, 50,000 pounds to study. And look, it's expensive in terms of interest, but you don't have to pay it back until you're earning. And 50% of people roughly may never pay it back. And so you've got that huge financial incentive to go and do something. But if you want to start your own business, you get nothing, right? You try and set up a bank account as a small business person in the UK, as a young business person in particular. Even getting a bank account is hard. People talk about debanking of politicians. There's debanking of small businesses all the time. Or if you try and get a loan from the bank to start a business, they have been regulated against taking any risk to the point where they just won't do it. The computer will say no. And so we have this incentive structure in education where we financially tell people at 18, don't even think about starting a business. And even then, our university courses, with some good exceptions, are not good at helping people start businesses. A study of UK graduates said only 6% of people who've gone on to start a business say their university course helps them, right? 6%. If 6% of doctors said their university course helped them, we'd be outcry. We'd be like, well, cancel the university. What are you doing? And so, well, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Loads of ways that university can be great, but I'm just pointing to some of the some examples just early on of how, wanting to scratch that itch of trying something, building something and pushing to learn where the real pain point is for customers or users or whatever it is you're solving so you can build something valuable. That whole process can take months, years, requires so much time and dedication, but we make it harder by having financial institutions or educational institutions that aren't supportive of people starting companies. And then just culturally, things are getting slightly better. But in reality, a few years ago, there was a study that asked Brits to name a famous entrepreneur. And most of them named Del Boy, who's a fictional character from Only Fools and Horses, right? Like they couldn't name a Dyson. There's so few celebrated entrepreneurs in the UK, even though actually we have, a plethora of very successful people. And that has a knock-on effect. It has a knock-on effect to what people aspire to do. And, the government, in particular, the current government, they basically signal, we don't want you to start businesses because if you do, we're going to punish you more, right? Effectively, we're going to tax you more. We're going to disincentivize you to try that kind of risky work. Now, they may say that's because, we have to, right? We're just in this fiscal situation where we have to raise taxes. But inevitably, if you put more disincentive on people to take a risk and build a business and take all the responsibilities of hiring people and developing new things, if you disincentivize people to do that, fewer people will do it. And so, overall, there's all of these different challenges to building something in the UK, which is a great shame because I think fundamentally there's something changing now where more people want to, and thanks to AI, more people can.
In the last 20 to 30 years, I think since around Blair's time, there's been a large kind of push for people to go to university who aren't necessarily lawyers, doctors, or the big university courses. And I think since then, obviously, even in the last couple of days, we've seen the Labour government introduce inflation-based tuition fee increases. Do you think it's finally time now to again shift the ambition of saying, do people still go to university for degrees that may not necessarily put you into a job immediately after graduating? Do you think it's time to push more, even business ventures or something different? Do you think it's time for university to stop being the number one ambition for most people?
Look, I think university can be a great thing for many people. It gives you a chance to get out of your area, meet new people, take on some responsibility, right? You look after yourself away from, your family home and learn something, hopefully. So there's loads of positives to it. I really don't want to play down universities too much, but I would agree that the number of people going now means that there's loads of people who aren't choosing other routes like vocational degrees, apprenticeships, entrepreneurship, where they may be better suited to it. They may be more passionate about that, or they may, just make more money doing that, right? I've got friends very few friends, but some friends who chose apprenticeships over university, and they're doing just as well as many of the people who went to university, right? And they've been doing it for longer, a couple of rungs up the career ladder. So if you're financially motivated, university doesn't make a huge amount of sense anymore. If you are motivated by entrepreneurship, university doesn't make a lot of sense. If there's a particular field you're passionate about, you want to learn more about. Makes a load of sense still, right? I don't want to downplay how great it can be, but I think we have, as a society, and we're paying for it now, probably overburdened loads of people with debt, and put loads of pressures on our system and robbed a load of people of like different types of work and to some extent dignity, because for so long Britain sort of held up having a bachelor's of arts or science as some kind of like great medal, when there's many other really worthy ways of making a living and doing something interesting and contributing to society, that we've overshot it, and we need to get that balance back. But that only happens by changing the incentives, right? You cannot just say, you can't just say it. You have to change the incentives as to why so many people suddenly started going to university.
Are you optimistic for the next Labour budget? Do you think it will help smaller businesses, or do you think it's going to make it even worse almost?
Well, the reality is, at a budget, the most important thing is finding a way to bring down the cost of debt that we have as a country, right? There's massive debt that's been rising, partly because of demographics, partly because of COVID, partly because of poor investment choices historically. There's loads of reasons, right? And growing welfare bills, there's lots of reasons why we have that debt, and it's a big weight on the economy. And right now we're paying so much in interest, it's only going in one direction. And so the number one priority for any company is, am I in an economic environment where I can, which is stable, where I can do business? The UK's got great rule of law, generally speaking, so that's important. I think the government, it does say sometimes positive things and does some positive things, so I don't want to be overly negative at all. But most importantly, if the current upcoming budget can say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what the UK is going to do to try and lower the cost of debt and manage our finances better going forward, more responsibly going forward, I actually think that's the biggest thing you can do. You'll get investor confidence globally back. Small businesses may have a chance of being able to raise debt or equity because the interest rates might flatten out or come down. And overall, the long-term security of Britain and the strength of the pound will be better off. So I don't want to overplay everything is about small businesses, right? It's also about healthcare. It's also about education, and it's about the economy. But really, the budget has to fix this really quite worrying challenge that we're facing as a country. Just the debt we're paying is out of control. And so, and unfortunately, because of the way the last budget was handled, taxes will have to go up further, even though they hadn't intended that, because we took on so much more debt. Right? It's an obvious thing that's going to happen. And also, fewer people stayed in the country because of taxes and everything else. So I hope there's a realization that the way we get out of this hole is growing the economy. And a big part of that is helping people start businesses and helping people grow businesses and not punishing them for starting businesses. I hope that's part of it. And I think it is part of the solution. But there's probably a few other things that have to be in there as well to create an environment, whether it's lower energy fees, whether it's, easier hiring practices, or whether it's, more stable finances that help the innovators and the entrepreneurs that
James,
the UK
before
has.
we let you go, just a final word to some of the younger people listening around our age who are thinking of starting a business. Just some closing advice would be fantastic for those people.
Yeah, look, I think starting a business isn't for everyone, right? You want to find something you're kind of passionate about, and that's often it's such a banal statement people make, but it when you find it, because it's like that thing which you're willing to go down the rabbit holes on the internet to learn more about, or talk to your friends boringly about all the time, or go the extra mile to do. And that can be loads of stuff. It could be dancing, can be sports, could be computer games, can be chess, whatever it is, some kind of area of academics. If it happens to be some area of business like building things, the number one thing I recommend is trying. And once again, that sounds banal, but the best businesses I've ever met or ever been involved in, and the best entrepreneurs I've ever worked with, what they started off doing felt like a toy. It felt like a little experiment they did on the side, right? They set up that website, they built that app, with one of these app building tools now, it's easier than ever. Or, they tried writing this thing, they tried building it, starting a magazine. It felt like a toy, it felt like a hobby. And they dedicated so much time to it that they built it out, where they realized, the more they talked to, say, customers, they learned that actually the problem wasn't what they thought it was, it's actually this problem. And that problem is a really big one. And then, you get used to understanding, how do I build solutions for people that they eventually, hopefully, will pay for. And over time, you'll find a massive problem in the sector you're interested in that you'll be able to attack with all of these new AI tools, hopefully. at your disposal. So the number one thing is try, put something out there, right? If you are, 18 or around that age, if you're a teenager today, you should have tried to sell something online, right? Go in your closet, pull out the t-shirt you never wear, put it on Depop. You should have tried to have put a website up, right? Even if it's a blog about your favorite singer or footballer, you should have tried to do that. You should have tried to create content, whether it's a YouTube video, it's TikTok, or it's put something out on Spotify using one of these AI voice tools. Like, you should try, because that process of creation, you'll learn so much, and it will feel silly initially, and people will say it's rubbish initially. That is part of the process, and you'll get better because you tried. And over time, you'll get so good, people will start paying you to do stuff, and that's when you've probably hit the entrepreneurial streak.
Well, James, thank you very much for speaking with us.
That's okay. I really enjoyed it.
Amazing to listen to you.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, and make sure you buy James's book. Quick plug.